It's pretty natural in game franchise discourse to draw pretty clear lines between what is a main series game and what's a spin-off. Talking about the main series only makes it easy to assess a series' mechanical evolution and how design teams grew alongside their series. A main series game being one that is iterating upon the framework established in the original game, while a spin-off is under the same intellectual properties umbrella but is its own thing. Like Crash 2 and Crash 3 are sequels to Crash 1, while Crash Team Racing is a spin-off since it's an entirely different genre starring the same characters. In a long-running series that doesn't have a large number of games, it's easy to see what is mainline. Metal Gear and Metal Gear Solid 5 are almost nothing alike, but they're both main series Metal Gear games, and you can track the evolution of the series by playing the main games and seeing how it got from point A to point B, and then clearly seeing what is a spin-off in that framework. But then, when you have a big franchise spanning dozens upon dozens upon dozens of games, it can be difficult to draw hard lines. This video was inspired by these cool ones on the Mario games by Jan Misali. I wanted to do my own video talking about the Sonic series and showing how I perceive what is a mainline Sonic game and what's a spin-off. This series makes it especially difficult compared to something like Mario or Metal Gear since Sonic changes gameplay styles regularly, so there isn't one clear through line from Sonic 1 to Shadow Generations. I think we can all agree that for a Sonic game to be considered a main series game, it would have to be a fast-paced action platformer since the first Sonic the Hedgehog is one. By my count, there are about 40 fast-paced action platformers in the Sonic franchise, and the number will depend on if you count different games with the same name as unique, like the versions of Sonic Unleashed or Sonic Colors as separate games, which I do, but your mileage may vary. The number rests somewhere between 40 and 50 depending on what counts to you. So where to even begin to sort such a thing? Well, let's begin by going over the way I looked at it in my past videos. In short, I just saw it as platformers developed by Sonic Team. This seemed like a pretty easy way to go about it. Sonic the Hedgehog on the Genesis was designed by Sonic Team, and they've made the bulk of important Sonic platformers. So, there you have it. The main series of Sonic is Sonic 1, Sonic 2, Sonic CD, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, Sonic Adventure 2, Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic 06, Sonic and the Secret Rings, Sonic Unleashed HD, Sonic and the Black Knight, Sonic Colors Wii, Sonic Generations HD, Sonic Lost World HD, Sonic Forces, Sonic Frontiers, and Shadow Generations. This certainly is a good starting point as it covers most of the series without getting too much into the depths of obscurity, but even with this list, there are certain things that are debatable. For example, Sonic 1 was developed by Sonic Team in Japan, but Sonic 2 was not. Sonic 2 was made in America by a specially assembled team called the Sega Technical Institute. However, several key members of Sonic Team moved to America so they could develop Sonic 2 at STI, while those who stayed in Japan developed Sonic CD for the Sega CD. Sonic 2 was technically not developed by Sonic Team, but at the end of the day, it was made mostly by people who worked at Sonic Team before. So I'm willing to count it as a Sonic Team game, especially because the Sega Technical Institute disbanded only a couple of years later when their last project, Sonic Extreme, got cancelled. Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, or just Sonic 3 and Knuckles, was developed by STI as well, but according to the Sonic Wiki, only the Japanese developers at STI developed Sonic 3 with the aid of Sonic Team back in Japan, so I'm willing to just also credit Sonic Team for that game as well. Jumping ahead a decade, there are a couple of other games I listed that some seem to debate about whether or not they count as mainline Sonic games or not. Shadow the Hedgehog and the Sonic Storybook games. Calling the Storybook games platformers might be giving them too much credit since both games are on rails and your only task is to steer Sonic away from obstacles. Honestly, I wouldn't really object to someone saying these are spin-offs since the gameplay is very different from the whole rest of the series and they have their own unique branding and identity as Sonic runs through fantasy landscapes, and the plots have nothing to do with the rest of the series as well. But I personally count them as main series games because they'd be the only semi-platform focused Sonic Team games I wouldn't be counting if I didn't, so I just tossed them in. But then, Shadow the Hedgehog is one that I'm far more passionate about including as a core Sonic game. Sure, the name of the game would tell you it's not a Sonic game at all, but think about it like this. Shadow 05 continues iterating on the gameplay of Sonic Adventure 1, 2, and Heroes. It's literally the same engine as Heroes. It was Sonic Team's main project after Heroes and before 06, and was the big Sonic game of 2005. It continues Shadow's story directly from SA2 and Heroes, and its ending informs Shadow's role in Sonic 06. Now, the Shadow game has gotten a direct story follow-up in the recent Shadow Generations, so it's undeniably a big part of the Sonic series, both in and out of universe. But then, that might lead you to wonder, what about the other Sonic games starring characters besides Sonic? Well, the games starring Tails and Eggman aren't platformers, so they're spin-offs for not clearing that bar alone. But then, what about Knuckles Chaotix for the Sega 32X, I hear you asking? Well, looking at the Sonic Wiki page for this game, it says it was not developed by Sonic Team, but instead a branch of Sega itself. Furthermore, while this game debuted the Chaotix, When they returned in Sonic Heroes, Takashi Iizuka, when doing press for Heroes, distanced the new form of the Chaotix from their debut because Knuckles Chaotix was a side game not made by Sonic Team. So this game essentially rebooted those classic characters. I consider Chaotix a spin-off given how it plays and how it's structured, but the case could be made it was a mainline game given its status as a fast-paced action platformer, which is what I said at the beginning. But then that goes back to my original point that being made by Sonic Team was an important bar to clear for main series status. But then, that has holes too, because there are Sonic platformers that aren't developed by Sonic Team that have had a big impact on the series. Take Sonic Mania from 2017, for example. I don't think I've ever seen this game debated as a main series game. It was made by a group of people who got their start as fan developers, and then they made their own team called Hedgehog and then started working with Sega and Sonic Team to an official capacity, which, of the two games released in 2017, is obviously the better one. It's not even a contest. Sonic Mania trounces Sonic Forces, the Sonic Team game, in basically every way. Plus, Mania had a direct impact on the gameplay of the franchise going forward. Sonic Mania popularized the drop dash move, which allowed Sonic to instantly spin dash by revving up in midair and taking off when you hit the ground. This mechanic returned for classic Sonic and Sonic Forces, was given to modern Sonic and Sonic Frontiers, and has been a staple of Sonic fan games ever since, and was in Sonic Superstars, and was also given to both Sonics in the remaster of Sonic Generations. This should clearly demonstrate that Sonic Mania is a pretty important part of Sonic's legacy for a variety of reasons, being the end product of fan devs going from ROM hackers to making remasters of the classic games, to making their own game that became the highest rated Sonic game in over 15 years and influenced all future titles, both official and otherwise. That's pretty big stuff. Which is why Mania is definitely a notable exception to my rule about Sonic Team games only, since I do tend to consider Mania a core installment of the franchise. The story even leading to classic Sonic's appearance in Forces. But then, that opens the door for other platformers not made by Sonic Team to be considered mainline as well. Superstars was basically the sequel to Mania, only it was made by a studio called Arzest. This studio was created by Naoto Oshima, one of the original designers of Sonic, with the aid of Sonic Team. And this was also the big Sonic game of 2023, so this is also worthy of consideration as a mainline game. But then what about the handheld Sonic platformers that weren't made by Sonic Team? I was only just going over the console games since Sonic's life began on the home consoles. But these have had a pretty significant impact as well. Look at how Sonic Rush on the DS created the boost gameplay that was brought to the Sonic Team series in Unleashed. That ought to make Sonic Rush a pretty significant entry in the series' history, right? And for that matter, Rush's boost was a continuation of the boost mode mechanic seen in Sonic Advance 2 and Sonic Advance 3. So then the argument can be made for them getting main series status, and if they are, then Sonic Advance 1 would get it as well. These handheld games debuting some pretty mainstay characters like Cream the Rabbit and Blaze the Cat, who had gone on to have big roles in Sonic Team games like Sonic Heroes and Sonic 06. And then, if story-significant platformers is the standard, then Sonic Rivals is the game where Silver re-debuts to the story. He first showed up in Sonic 06, but the ending of the game saw the heroes go back in time and make it so the events of the game don't take place, so when Silver shows up in Sonic Rivals, it's treated like he's never met the rest of the cast before because the time he did was erased from history. So now you might be wondering, where is this nerdy rant going? Well, it's leading to my more nuanced take on what counts as a mainline Sonic game compared to what I used to believe, which was the list I outlined earlier in the video. Now I think the core franchise of Sonic is less of a hard line of certain games and more of a ranked hierarchy of importance. At the top, you have console games developed by Sonic Team. The list goes as follows. Sonic the Hedgehog for the Sega Genesis. This goes without saying, it's the original Sonic game, the game from which all others follow. Sonic the Hedgehog 2 for the Sega Genesis as well. This is the direct sequel that cemented the series as a gaming mainstay. Sonic CD, which was developed by Sonic Team and saw the art team really expand the scope of Sonic's world with new characters and gameplay mechanics, also creating a musical style to fit the series in Japan and the US, since the game wasn't limited by the sound technology of the Genesis for the first time. Sonic 3 and Knuckles is the next direct sequel and was one of the most epic and ambitious platformers of the early 90s. Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast was a series jump to 3D, and its gameplay serving as the model that all 3D Sonic games after this were trying to build upon. Sonic Adventure 2 is the direct sequel and introduces the iconic Shadow the Hedgehog and Rouge the Bat. Sonic Heroes is the first time the series went multi-plat following the end of Sega's hardware manufacturing and was made by Sonic Team. Shadow the Hedgehog was the direct sequel and is mainline for the reasons I just went into. Sonic 06 was the big next-generation leap for Sonic Team and it crashed and burned. Definitely a huge moment in the series' history. The storybook games are still a debatable inclusion, but I'm just going to say they are and leave it at that. Sonic Unleashed was Sonic Team's comeback after 06 and was a huge game for the standards of its time. It was also the first time the boost gameplay reached a 3D game and has influenced every Sonic game to come after. Sonic Colors was done by a side team of Sonic Team, the one that did the storybook games and Lost World, but it was also a landmark title, being the first time the series had seen critical success for the first time in years, solidifying that the gameplay of Unleashed was here to stay. Sonic Generations was the 20th anniversary title, bringing back and celebrating virtually everything from the series' first 2 decades. Sonic Lost World was the next Sonic Team game, and there's not much to say about this one, since it tried to be a lot different to appeal to Nintendo fans, but it didn't really work out and the concept was abandoned. But it is still the big Sonic game of 2013, so it's main series. Sonic Mania is the big exception to the Sonic Team rule for previously established reasons, and from there's a pretty clear pipeline to the present day. Forces was the big Sonic Team comeback after Boom failed, Frontiers was the big comeback after Forces failed, Sonic Superstars saw them collaborate with Arzest, and Shadow Generations was something new Sonic Team developed to expand on Sonic Generations for its re-release that also focused on Shadow's story to tie it in with the third Sonic movie. That's the first hierarchy of the main series. And then you have the platformers that weren't done by Sonic Team that had an impact on the series nevertheless, making them honorary main series games in my eyes. Sonic 3D Blast by Traveler's Tales, while not actually a 3D game, did show that Sonic's combat didn't really work in 3D, and so its homing attack power-up likely served as inspiration for the homing attack in Adventure 1. The Advanced series evolved the 2D formula for the 21st century. The Rush series decided to take 2D Sonic into a new direction entirely that ended up influencing what direction the 3D series went in. And then there's Sonic Dream Team, a cool, non-Sonic Team-developed platforming game for Apple Arcade devices that came out in 2023. This is significant since it shows how far mobile tech has come and could have influence in the main series, since it brought back a bunch of extra playable characters, which the series has continued doing ever since, even having a Shadow-starred game just 1 year later. And in a tier below that, you have the platformers that were less impactful on the series, but still platformers nevertheless, like the Game Gear games. Sonic 1 and 2, Sonic Chaos, Sonic Triple Trouble, and Sonic Blast. These games are so limited in technology that their gameplay wasn't up to par with the actual Genesis games, but the first 4 showed an interesting evolution as they mostly got better with each one. Sonic Blast just being a turd, though. Knuckles Chaotix was the first platformer not focused on Sonic. Sonic Pocket Adventure was a much better replication of the formula on a handheld. The Sonic Rivals series isn't very important outside of Silver's story, but even then that's not saying much because the writing in these games is horrible, and these games weren't even released in Japan, where Sonic was created. The Sonic 4 saga were given a label that would imply great significance, but the first one was just a sloppy mobile game turned into a sequel with nothing really going for it, and the sequel to that was just a game trying to make the best of a bad situation. I consider them both on the bottom tier of important Sonic platformers. And then you have the dimps-made side games based on Sonic Team games. Sonic Unleashed for Wii, Sonic Colors for DS, the 3DS versions of Sonic Generations, and Sonic Lost World. And then, the Sonic Boom games are kind of platformers, but they're Sonic Boom games, none of which were developed by Sonic Team, nor had they done much for them. It's just a weird era of Sonic that I put in its own tier at the bottom. Important to note because of how their failure impacted the series going forward with Forces and Frontiers and all that, but not mechanically relevant to the history of the series. Then below that, firmly outside the bounds of the main series, you have racing games like Sonic R and Sonic Riders and the kart racing games, of which there are enough to form their own lineage within the series. Which makes sense given Sonic is a fast-paced platformer, it only makes sense for him to have a lot of racing games, and below that you have miscellaneous other spin-offs like Sonic the Fighters, and Sonic Battle, and Sonic Chronicles the Dark Brotherhood, and the Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. All games that are pretty much one-offs in genres very different from the main platformers. And there you have it. That's how I categorize the entire Sonic the Hedgehog franchise. This series is very complicated with its history and how the various games connect to each other both in and out of universe, so I hope this guide has given you something to think about or consider, as you can feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. But that's about all the time we have for today, so next up is the big project I've been teasing for months. And I'm going to unveil it right now as every handheld Sonic level ranked from worst to best. It's a sequel to the 3D Sonic levels video from last year, and I'm very excited to release it next week, so hope everyone's looking forward to that. But in the meantime, I'll close the video by saying what I always do. If you made it this far into the video, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.